Welcome back to What's New with Mead. We're in episode 56, and I have Rebel Hive Meadery here to talk all about their mead, their process. Specifically, we're talking to Ryan today from Rebel Hive. I'm sure he's one of many of the amazing people there that, it'd be great to chat with everybody, but that's hard to schedule everybody. So, Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, so I would love for you to give us a little, I don't want to say elevator pitch because this is a podcast and we have lots of time. Give us a little backstory about your meadery and what's going on there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so my journey in mead really began back, I was in grad school, and I went to grad school for chemistry. Thought I wanted to teach at college level. And while in grad school, I was looking for kind of a hobby to do outside of my courses, something that would keep me sane, and got involved with the local homebrew club. And it was there that I came across this idea of mead. So that was probably back in 2012. Yeah, so over 10 years now.
Whoa.
Got involved with, started hearing about this idea of mead. At the time, I've never heard of it before. But if you talk to anyone who ferments, the question they go to is, what else can I ferment? The weird addiction we have. And so I came across this idea of fermenting honey, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. Tried my hand at a batch. It got terrible. Tried my hand at what was in, we're in PA, so it's a state-controlled wine and liquor here. So tried my hand at tried out what was in the PA state stores. And they were all pretty bad at the time too. And again, this is going back 10 years now. And so I was like, okay, maybe I just don't like mead. Like it's just not that good. Then the president of the homebrew club at the time had, for National Mead Day in August, he had a get together where a bunch of people brought their homemade stuff and he showed how to make a batch, how he does it. And some of the stuff they had just absolutely blew me away with how good it was. So that was the first time I was like, okay, this can be really good stuff. So started diving into it, really looking into the science behind the fermentation and the ways to control fermentation and kind of new age techniques, and started improving my own recipes, started winning some awards at some local homebrew competitions and things like that. And then my big breakthrough came it was either 2015 or 2016. I submitted a mead for a competition and submitted it just to get some feedback, try to improve my own meads that I was making. And I ended up winning best of show in the entire mead only competition. One of the judges came up to me then at our next homebrew meeting, and he was like, when are you opening commercially? Because this is the best stuff I've ever tried. So that was the final push to be like, okay, I need to take this seriously now.
Yeah.
So started the process of, getting my business plan together and all that good stuff, cutting through all the red tape we have in our state, and finally did our first sale around June of 2019. And here we are 4 years later. We just celebrated our 4th year anniversary.
Man, that's super cool. And I love that journey too. I love that you mentioned, well, I don't love this, but I think that's a fact, an important thing that you said. You tried a bunch of mead, commercial mead, and you didn't really find anything you liked. And so one of your first inferences or things you thought was, well, maybe mead's just not my thing. And I don't love that for people who want to try things. I mean, wine is so expansive that if you don't like white wines, you can go and try reds. You can go try ports and dessert wine. Like wine has a long list of things you can like. Mead does as well. Unfortunately, commercial mead is not as big as wine, and so the options aren't there. And sometimes people only give mead one try. They'll buy one bottle. If it's not good enough, they'll say, well, this actually wasn't for me, and I'm done. So I love that you guys are continuing to put more quality mead out there in the universe.
No, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing that we run into a lot, actually, is when we're out selling, we'll say, have you ever had mead before? And we get all the time, yeah, but I don't like it. And it's like, okay, where did you try it? And it'll be like one place that they've tried it, and I always say, have you had a wine that you don't like? Have you had a beer that you don't like? And the answer is always, yeah, but you still drink wine and beer. Or, have you had a cheeseburger you didn't like before? Yeah, but you still eat cheeseburgers, right? So it's the same with mead, and it's just catching fire now in terms of the craft beverage age that I mean, we can talk about everything that goes into it a little later, but there's just, we've only touched the surface of what mead can even start to be. So if you've had bad mead in the past, try it again, because, try it from different places, because every place is different.
Yeah. Well, and so for a little fun fact for the listeners is Ryan sent me some mead to try. And in the process of moving, if you're watching the video version of this, you can see a very exploded room behind me. I didn't catch the box in time, and so I was going to hopefully drink those, or at least try some today on this podcast, but unfortunately I didn't plan very well. So I will be trying those tonight, though, with my good friend, and you can see us taste some of that on the Homebrew Guys podcast. That is a live thing. Now, Ryan, I want to talk a little bit about you said some, and you're talking about what you sent me. You mentioned a couple products. I want to know, what are your flagship products that you guys, do you have any that are like your longest run of things? Are you guys constantly revolving the door? What do you do?
Yes. So we have our four. The four that I sent you are what we call our Rebel Core. They are our flagship four meads that we have year round. So it's not you, it's mead. That's our traditional orange blossom honey. We have Respect Your Elders, which is our elderberry version. We have Cherry Lee Lewis, which is a mixture of tart and dark cherries. And then finally, we have Jazzy Java, which is a coffee one made from a local coffee roaster. Mm-hmm. So those four we have year round. And then we try to come up with at least one new one each month. We got a little behind this year, so I apologize for that, but we will have new ones coming out soon. We actually have one of our best sellers of all time is our peanut butter and jelly mead, which is called Rebel Lunch. Okay. That will be coming hopefully by the end of July. It's currently fermenting and almost done. But yeah, we do everything from dry hop meads, different fruited meads. We have our 4th anniversary one will be coming out as well, probably in about 2 weeks. It needed an extra week or two in the barrel yet, but that is aged in a bourbon barrel. It's a mixture of some orange blossom, wildflower, and avocado honey. So you get a bit of the darkness from the avocado blossom honey, and then has some cherry juice added to that and aged in a Woodford barrel. And it's one of my favorite things to drink right now. I've been tapping out of the barrel for a little bit. So I'm excited for that one. But yeah, so we have our 4 year round ones, and then we try to come out with new ones all the time.
Yeah. So I know my listeners, the moment you said coffee and you said peanut butter jelly, like I think those in the mead world are often little like buzzwords, and everyone's brain goes, wait a minute, he did it. And so I want to know, if you're, without spoiling all your secrets, because I think that's part of the game, is let's go to coffee first. Do you have any tips for people who are interested in doing a coffee mead? Obviously, there's lots of ways to do it. What are ways that you've found that work well, or what are ways you have found that don't work well?
Yeah, so that one, so I'm a huge coffee fan. You pretty much find me 24/7 drinking coffee. So I tried everything from dry mead to sweeter meads. I find staying in the semi-sweet to sweet range is better for coffee. That's just my own personal findings. And then I experimented with a whole bunch of different kinds. So this is a flavored coffee from Reading Coffee Roasters. Gave me some of the best flavor out of it. It has hints of pecan, chestnut, rum flavors in that coffee, and it just blends really well with the mead. And then that one, compared to the other ones, I was just saying to drink super cold. That coldness, it just gives a nice creamy mouthfeel to it, and it's just one of our best sellers, especially outside during the summer and the heat. We serve that one, ice cold, and it's awesome.
So are you... Again, I'm trying not to poke too much, but I am curious, morbidly curious for my own mead making. I've only made a coffee mead once, and I tried to do it 3 different ways. I used like brewed coffee as a base. I used coffee grounds in the primary, and then I used coffee grounds in the secondary. What's a good place for people to start if they want to try to make a coffee mead? when it comes to
Yeah,
the very beginning?
sure. So this one goes into our secondary. So once we're done fermenting, that's when I add the spices, and you'll see that with most of our meads. And the reason for that was when we went commercial, right? We have to sell product. So if you're adding things in primary, sometimes that takes a little bit longer to ferment. It might take a little bit longer to age, and all that good stuff. But so when we do things commercially, we do a lot in secondary, a lot of flavoring in secondary. So that's what I do with the coffee as well. But I did, just like you, I did a lot of experiments when I was still home brewing and just got the best results in secondary. So I made a really nice, and this is for anyone trying to improve mead in general. Start with a really, really nice traditional base. If you can nail the traditional and really get that down, flavoring it is easy at that point, I always say.
Yeah.
And you know that you can start applying that to then other different types of honey. You can try different yeast from there, but just getting that one base traditional down is so crucial, I feel. So once you get that nice base, that's when, you know, we're able to go to secondary and really flavor it with all sorts of things. And that's what we've got the best results with our coffee mead.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know because I think that, like we were talking about, there are lots of ways to do this. And coffee is a very potent flavor, and it's really easy to go overboard. And so I feel like it's just a good little, knowing in your experience the best playground is secondary is a great place to start. It takes away a little bit of the mystery, but obviously high quality coffee is probably going to be helpful in that situation.
Yeah.
And then, just kind of trial and error. Let's switch over to the peanut butter jelly side, because that's also one, like I said, that people want to hear about. So peanut butter itself is super hard to use. Oils, I think most people know this. When I've made my peanut butter jelly mead, I've mostly used like PB2. Are you guys going dried peanut butter as for most of your peanut flavor? Are you boiling peanuts? What are you doing?
No, we don't do any of that. So I actually use a peanut butter extract.
Oh.
Again, this is another one that I've done every different way imaginable. Boiled peanuts work a lot, and I've had really good meads with boiled peanuts. The problem, again, is for us on the commercial scale, it's just we don't have that equipment, you know?
Right.
So it kind of forced my hand. And funny story about this is that I pushed off making this for so long because it just sounded gross to me. It just sounded nasty. And finally, right before I opened up commercially, actually, I made a batch at home, and it was probably one of the best things I've ever drank.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, what we find is best. Again, this is another one that we add the flavors in secondary. So I take an orange blossom and clover base, orange blossom clover traditional, add Concord grape juice to it. So the Concord grape juice doesn't ferment at all. It's just raw in there. And anyone who's had, if you've had grape juice, just regular grape juice, that's typically Concord. So you can kind of get that taste. And then I add in our peanut butter extract. And that comes from Amaret, I think, or Amaretti. Amaretti. So for those who don't know them, they make tons of purees and extracts for the brewing world. That make really, really high quality products. So yeah, I just add enough extract to give it that nice peanut butter taste to it, and it's become, like I said, one of our best sellers. This will be our third year doing it, and this year we're going to do the biggest batch yet, and hopefully we sell out quickly again.
Yeah. So I'm very familiar with Amaretti. I used him. I haven't used him as much recently, but I have, like, just in my brew room over here, probably 20 or 30 little extract and flavorings and stuff from them I still need to use. And we had a friendship for a while, and they were always sending me stuff. So I definitely recommend using them, because obviously they're usable and useful for a lot of flavorings. Some things are just hard to do, like peanut butter. Peanut butter is really hard to do, and it's also really messy. So I'm sure you have way less mess when it comes to some of those things.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. It's whenever we do anything that's liquid, so concentrates, purees, extracts, it's much easier to control the amount you add. compared to, kind of boiling peanuts and hoping for the best. That's a lot harder to control that final taste.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about on a commercial scale. You're talking about starting with a big base, traditional base. So, are you guys fans of specific yeast for your traditionals? Do you guys play around with that? Do you plan and say, well, I know this is going to be a PB&J base, so I want to use this specific thing? Like, how do you guys choose your yeast for your traditional base?
So again, this came through trial and error back when I was first making my initial batches at home. I like to play with beer yeast more than wine yeast. But that's also because I'm making mead that's, I'll call them quick mead, that I intend for you to drink fairly quickly. So I love Belgian beer yeast. Any off, what's called an off flavor. So sometimes it's banana, green apple, honey can be an off flavor. It goes really well with our honey base. And so I find Belgian beer yeast is really nice. It's also less finicky than a lot of wine yeast. It's not as temperature dependent. And then if we start doing any specialty traditionals, which we'll start coming out with now as well, those I'll start playing around more with the wine yeast. If I intend for it to sit a bit longer, age longer, maybe sit on your shelf a bit longer. So for our 4th anniversary, for example, we did QA11, I believe it was, from Lalvin.
Okay.
So we'll play around with different wine yeast depending on kind of the honey profile and what we want it to do. And all those as well, you can go on any of these yeast sites and read about the flavors that it's going to put off, and the flocculation, the temperature control, all that stuff, and kind of do it based off that. But again, it comes down to trying your own experiments first, and seeing how it turns out.
Well, yeah, and definitely trying different yeast to see, just to even understand the truth that yeast do impart flavors. I think young mead makers, I won't say inexperienced. Oh yeah, inexperienced mead makers would assume that every yeast is just going to do the same thing, and they're all intended to, of course, ferment through the sugars. However, they impart their own flavors, and you can't experience that without trial and error. So I do like that. Beer yeast for mead is something that I feel like people. It used to be like a shame situation until people tried it, and then they're like, "Oh, this works well." It's like, of course it does. Yeah,
I think mead just in general just got lumped into that wine category very early on in its existence in America, and I think people just went wine yeast right away. And wine yeast has many good points to it, but there's also downsides to it as well. And I think just the whole beer yeast, again, has barely been touched in terms of mead. So it's definitely something to give your hand at, or try your hand at.
Yeah, I did a really big yeast test. It was 16 different yeast over the course of 2 years or so. And then I did this combined video tasting notes kind of situation. And it's I think the top 5 were like 2 or 3 beer yeasts that for this traditional mead. And I thought that was really interesting. And I have another one going that's like 20 different yeasts, and I have a couple beer yeast in there. So I'm curious to see how they fare against these wine yeast in a head-to-head kind of situation. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah,
definitely.
All right, so you're I'll say you're still a young meadery. 4 years is a long time. Then you guys survived the pandemic, so that's its own win. I want to know, because I guess you started right during the pandemic time, what were some of those challenges you guys faced at the beginning that you could bat through?
Yeah, so the government shutdowns were definitely the hardest thing we've been through. Before that, I'll say, like I said, I kind of came from the beer world, where if you meet people who like drinking craft beer, they'll pretty much drink anything you put in front of them. And I find that that's not the case for the general public. So I thought mead would sell a lot easier than it does. It's getting a lot better now. Even just in 4 years, we've seen a huge turnaround on the market. But it's difficult just to get people to try mead. They have misconceptions. They think it's a beer. They think it's a wine. They really, I don't know, just have different ideas in their head of what it is. So just getting them to try it, I think, was something we overlooked. How much more difficult that was going to be. And now we're really pushing into the wholesale side of things, trying to get in different retailers. And we're running into an even bigger problem there, just with them willing to take mead on. Even though all the data shows that people are drinking more mead now, mead is the fastest growing alcoholic beverage right now. It's taking off. Corporate is a lot slower to accept that that notion. So just getting it into their hands has been a challenge. And then, of course, going through the pandemic, all the shutdowns, that really hurt us, primarily because here in PA, we weren't allowed to sample during that time.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, it was one of the fun state rules that they put in place. So mead is something that people need to try for the first time. Even if you're a mead drinker, you probably want to try it first to see if it's to your liking.
Right.
And especially people who've never had it before, like, you definitely need to get in their hands for them to buy a bottle. And so that really hurt us. And during that time, you see a spike in sales of things like vodka, whiskeys, different wines even took off in sales. But the thing is, everyone pretty much knows what those taste like. So we were still considered a necessary business, so there, as being alcohol in PA, so we were allowed to stay open, but we didn't have the hard liquors or the wines that people were used to, so it was a lot harder to sell our product, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, in the you're talking a lot about the people who are unsure about mead, and it's still true today. Even with it being a growing thing, people have a vague idea of what it is, but there's a lot of hurdles that we have to jump through to get mead to feel like it's something people want to try. And I think often, and I'm sure you experience this too, when you explain mead to somebody, you say, oh, this is a honey-based beverage. And then people who like sweet stuff might go, oh, yeah, great. That sounds awesome. And the people who don't like sweet stuff are like, oh, I won't like that. That sounds sweet. It's like, well, hold on. Yep. Doesn't have to be. Just because it's honey doesn't have to be a sweet thing. So having those options, and then honestly, it's what I do with my friends is kind of silly, but I'll just hand them stuff, say, try this, and I won't really give them an option, because it sounds bad. But if you explain too much, sometimes people will go, oh, I don't want to try that actually. It's like, well, are you allergic to it? No. Okay, then just give it a shot. Just see what happens. Yes. So you can't do that in a business world. Obviously, you'd have some lawsuits on your hand if you're, shoving mead in someone's face. But yeah, no, that's people good. Try stuff is important.
Absolutely, and that's another misconception we run into a lot too. People instantly think honey, so therefore it's sweet, and we say honey is actually 100% fermentable sugar. You have to control fermentation in some way to actually leave sugar behind in the finished product.
Right.
And a lot of beers that you try are going to be sweeter than mead, most meads that are out there.
Yeah.
But you add hops to beer in order to balance that. So you get that bitterness that balances the sweet, which is why it doesn't taste so sweet for the majority of beers anyway. So, explaining that, it's kind of eye-opening to a lot of people. And most of what we make is in the semi-sweet range. That's what we find people want. But like our year 4, so it's Rebellion year 4, that's completely dry. There's 0 residual sugar in that, and it drinks like a nice cocktail. It's just it's awesome. It's one of my favorites.
I'll have to buy some of that whenever it releases.
Sounds good. Yeah, if you have a good dry mead, there's nothing like it.
I want to ask you about hops, because you mentioned doing hopped meads, and I know that world, I know it's expanding, but there's still a lot of laws, regulations, at least in Oklahoma, weird things about putting hops in wine. They kind of pair wine and mead. together here in Oklahoma. So, in your experience, are you guys having to use a very small amount of hops like we have to sometimes here? Are there regulations on how much you can add? Where does that fall for you?
No, so there's no regulations in PA as to using hops. So we fall under two different regulation bodies. So there's the federal, which is TTB. They control. They're the ones who basically classify us as wine. There's not a separate mead category. It's either wine, beer, or hard liquor for the most part. So we fall under wine. We have to specify that we can't. There's certain regulations that we can and can't do. We can't necessarily specify vintage or the terroir for the most part. There's different regulations as to that. But if we add hops to it, then we don't need to get a recipe for it. So if I add anything, all right, let me back up a little bit. So if we're doing a traditional mead, say we use orange blossom honey, we don't need a recipe approved by the TTB. But if we add anything to it, so if I use a traditional and then add cherries to it, we need that recipe approved.
Okay.
It's dumb, outdated law, but it still exists.
Yeah.
However, hops are considered standard, and we can add hops without getting that recipe approved.
Interesting. Okay.
Interesting, yes. And then we also fall under the PLCB here, which is the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. And for the most part, they kind of stay out of the recipe side of things. They deal with more of want to be sure we're selling where they say we can sell and getting their taxes.
Right.
Other than that, they don't really care too much about what we put in it. Federally, though, we as a technical winery, we also can't have malted grain on premises, which I don't think a lot of people know. So there's a lot of what's called a braggot, which is that mix of it's a beer mead hybrid, and there's some awesome ones out there of those as well. But we can't do that commercially because we can't use malted grain. Which is interesting because breweries are allowed to use whatever honey they want. So there's a lot of, again, outdated laws that go back to Prohibition. But anyway, to answer your question, we don't have any restrictions on hops as far as I'm aware.
That's nice.
If we do, we didn't run into it yet.
Right.
But yeah, we love. I only do 2 right now during the year that get dry hopped, but it's definitely something I want to expand more into in the future because those, especially the fruitier hops, just add so much to that honey backbone.
Yeah, well, and I'd mention that because the laws are still adapting, and I think it's growing. But I know that that's a big problem for lots of different meaderies is they want to use hops. They want to do hopped mead, but then their state or something says, hey, you can only add X amount of hops per, gallon or whatever. And I can't remember the number here, but it was like per 100 gallons of mead or wine or whatever, it's something like 4 ounces of hops. And you're like, well, 4 ounces of hops is like, that's literally gonna do nothing.
Yeah.
You could probably boil it for 10 years and it's still not gonna do anything. Yeah. So that's just something I've seen, and I'm hoping that the laws will change and maybe will grow a little bit so we can get away from this kind of chaos there. Hopped meads are really good. I've been diving deeper with those. I really like them, and like you said, there's a ton of hop options, and you can get a lot of just cool things happening with those hops. So I hope that we can expand that enough where people can try it on a commercial scale a little bigger. Do you guys go to I'm not asking for trade secrets, but what kind of hops do you like to use, or have you experimented with that you enjoy using normally? Yeah,
so the one that I do every year now, and it'll be coming out toward the end of the year probably with it again, is Citra. Citra, just real nice go-to hop. Beer lovers love it too. But just that, again, we get a lot of that peach, mango, passion fruit notes from that just and we do that with our orange blossom traditional. So it just really the orange blossom honey and that the hop taste just is incredible together. And that's one that changes a lot too in the bottle. It's really good. We get a lot of like the peach notes up front when we first bottle, and then it changes to more of that mango and just well blended hop taste a couple months down the road. The other one I do is a lemon drop hop with
I like that one
with chamomile.
Oh.
So that combination's awesome for us. That's called Simple Boring Name, thanks to government. There's a story behind that, but we come out with that one in November. Hopefully for Election Day, we'll do that one again this year.
That's fun.
Yeah,
I like both of those. So Citra, my buddy and I, or he did a big hopped, like he tried to basically develop a really solid, just hopped mead recipe for people to try. And we did a bunch of testing, and he did like probably 10 or 12 different hops. And Citra was like number one, best one, independently super good, mixed with other things also super good. So that's awesome. And I like lemon drop hop too, because it's just, both of those have such a fun flavor profile, and they add a lot, and they play really well with honey. So especially if you're using orange blossom, like you're saying, that orange blossom, I'm sure just really bolsters up a lot of those honey characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's another one I do. I won't tell all the ingredients in this one because it's one of my favorites. And hopefully we'll start doing some carbonated canned stuff. Our plan is by the end of next year, but so we do a carbonated one, 5% alcohol that has Galaxy hops in it, and Galaxy hops have been amazing as well for carbonated, lower alcohol meads.
I've heard about those. I haven't really used them before, but I'd like to play around with it. It seems like it'd be fun. That's like hop world is just scratching the surface. You could probably spend 10 years just trying different hops, and by the time you get to the end of the first list, you got 25 more things to go through, which is super fun. A little overwhelming, not gonna lie, but super fun in its own right.
No, absolutely.
What are you're talking about doing these big traditionals as your base. What's your base batch size looking like nowadays? Are you guys? I guess you go by barrels, right? Is it?
Yeah. It's we find ourselves in between because the beer world goes by barrels, the wine world goes by liters. Yeah. So we're just kind of here. So I'll go with gallons today.
Okay.
So we do batches around 315 gallons at a time. So right around 10 barrels. And that's kind of our bulk batch. From there, we typically split that into about 2 or 3 kind of sub flavoring batches for the majority of our stuff. But as we're growing, we're starting to move toward bigger batches again. And like I said, our Rebel lunch, that's going to be somewhere around 120 gallons, which is the biggest batch we've done of that. And same thing with our Rebellion year 4, that's also right around the 110 gallons right now. So that's about our size right now. And we're looking to start doing bigger batches as well.
I just can't imagine. I'm still on the homebrew scale, and so I do like a 6, 7, 8 gallon batch of something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. And a while back, I bought is it Spindle? I don't know how you say the name of the brand, but they're like the orange and then white big barrels of things like fermenters. They're for homebrewers. Yeah. I bought a 32 gallon one, and I still have it. I've always wanted to fill it up and see if I can make 32 gallons of mead. But then I'm like, what do I do with 32 gallons? I mean, you could do a lot. That's the question I should not be asking is what can you do with it? But there's just new problems that come with that much mead. For example, if I put that thing on the ground and then I got to move it places, 32 gallons of brew is going to be so heavy. It's going to be impossible to move. So it's just you get to those kind of statistics, logistics of things, and you start to need forklifts and ways to pick stuff up. And, it's just a lot of chaos there. So I can only imagine, even at the 120 gallon scale, you guys are having to do some use different kinds of equipment to be able to operate in a normal capacity.
No, absolutely. It's interesting though that once you get to that size scale, it's almost easier in some ways. Like there's definitely things that are harder about it, but we're big enough where we're using pumps to move things around. You're not doing any siphoning or things like that. You're not manually moving stuff back and forth. And so in some regards, it is easier. And it's kind of, for us to do these 300-gallon batches, if we scale up to, say, 3,000 gallons, which we're nowhere close to yet, but if we scale up to that, it's almost the same amount of work. Yeah. Because on that scale, we would get a honey pump. We would pump the honey out of a big barrel. So once you get that base recipe down, for me, I haven't found scaling to be that hard, other than the upfront cost of the equipment, which is difficult. But other than that, it's you have the equipment to do the work for you, essentially. So
yeah,
to scale, it's not that difficult on the commercial level.
Well, and you guys are operating a little bit different than I think some other meaderies. Some meaderies are taking and doing more in the primary with flavor development. Yeah. And I know that that's a big problem, going from a homebrew level, 5-gallon, I've got this recipe down, to, okay, now I got to make 120 gallons of it, and I'm throwing all of these things in the primary. It's not quite just a multiplier scale when you get to some of those things. So for you guys just to have a traditional base and then to split it out was like, I mean, that makes things a whole lot easier, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I don't know if I'm giving away a secret or not, but that's one thing that gave us like a huge competitive advantage in the marketplace. I learned early on that you can't always do those super high end meads up front, right? Yeah. When you go commercial, it's all about the money at the end of the day, and so if you're producing the world's greatest mead that anyone's ever tried, but you're not able to sell it, it doesn't really matter, right? So you need that quick turnover, the meads that you're able to produce quickly and cheaply enough that people will buy it, and then down the line come out with new products. And you kind of see that if you again follow the beer world. That's kind of where a lot of beers are going now too. They have one main product. The one that comes to mind is New Belgium with their Voodoo Ranger. If you're familiar with that, right? They keep coming out with new versions of that, a new hopped one, a new, a sour version, or fruited with this fruit, so they're finding that economy of scale as well, as far as that goes. So yeah, that's, if anyone wants to go commercial, I say, that keep it simple, stupid. That's becomes really important on this level. If you ever want to do the greatest meat in the world, you have to start with stuff that people will buy.
Right. So you gotta have the money to be able to do it.
Yeah. So definitely doing those kind of bulk batches, that gave us a huge advantage. And now we're able to do some of these crazier one-off batches like our Rebel Lunch, Rebellion, some of the barrel aged stuff that might be more primary focused rather than secondary.
Yeah. So you're with going from big batch to smaller batches and then adding other flavors. I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are stabilizing or pasteurizing in some manner so that when you add that cherry juice in, when you add that other thing, you're not having to worry about re-fermentation. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. So we do a combination of filtering. So I'll go all the way down to sterile filtering. So the last round of filtering will remove any type of yeast or bacteria that should be there in the mead itself. And we also stabilize with potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate as well. So both of those kept high enough should stabilize. But yeah, filtering in general, again, which is a lot easier to do at the bigger scale. Yeah. It makes it so much cleaner, so much safer. And, I know that's kind of, especially in the wine world, that's really controversial whether to filter or not. I find, yes, it does change the flavor, but I always find it's for the better in general. Yeah. So,
well, I don't know what the big argument there is exactly, but my thought is, would it be that people are worried about obviously some flavor, but then tannin? Do you feel like there's any loss of tannin when you come down to filtering that far down, like stereo filtering?
Possibly. I can't say yes or no. I'm
Yeah.
not. I would, that would be something for definitely someone in the wine world that's been, working with barrels of
Yeah.
wine for their whole life. I'm not sure. Again, for the majority of what we've done, like I said, it only improves the taste. Now, I will say for like our rebellion, our year 4 rebellion, that that one I only coarse filtered, so I didn't go very low at all, and then I aged that in Woodford bourbon barrels, and when I pumped it out of those, it was like crystal clear. So that one I'm not going to touch with sterile filters. I'll just stabilize it.
Okay. Yeah.
So any tannins that are there shouldn't get removed at this point unless they fall out of solution.
Right. Well, I don't know much about it. I'm just speculating. So if anyone's listening right now, I'm sure somebody's already typing an email to correct me or tell me what's going on. And that's great. I appreciate that help. But that is something I feel like people would think. And so I would love to get to the point where I can filter my stuff, but I've looked at the homebrew scale and it is like an unnecessary amount of equipment and process to be able to filter every mead. And I just don't have the... I'd rather, like, when I clear my stuff, I always use potassium sorbate, metabisulfite to stabilize, and then I often let things just fall out of suspension, and then I'll use like Kisasol and chitosan, stuff like that to clear. But it does sound nice just to be able to hook a pump up and put your filter in and go, here you go, not have to worry about all that. So
and there's those what is it, the Bueno filters, or
yeah,
I'm probably getting that wrong. Those are, that's what I started with on the homebrew scale, and it worked pretty well for me there.
Yeah. I get kind of lazy, honestly, when it comes to a lot of those things. I get tired of, like, I just want to be able to stick my auto siphon in and just move it on over. And then, that's where I like the clearing agents, is because most of the time it does, they do a good job. And then as long as you don't start mixing it back up, like, you got yourself a pretty clear mead. But again, I know some people don't like using those things or can't, chitosan. I can't remember which one. Kisasol chitosan is shellfish based, and so then there's like, well, you have shellfish allergies and blah blah blah. You don't want to put somebody in a predicament where they're gonna get themselves in trouble. So I understand there's limitations.
There are studies on that as well. So we don't actually use. I have used some of that in the past, but we don't actually use that. But there are studies that show that it doesn't affect people with shellfish allergies.
Oh, really?
I'm not a lawyer, though. Don't take my word for it. But you can look into that. There's been a lot of studies, and I'm gonna mess it. It's been so long since I looked into it, but they use it doesn't have the actual protein that people are typically allergic to. But check it out for yourselves, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's, I know that's been controversial as well, but there's also, yeah. I'll leave it at that.
There's a lot of. Okay, I love that people have done that study, though, because there's also studies on, like, people often talk about potassium metabisulfite, and then there's just controversy in that, like, people say, well, I'm allergic to it, or I have a sensitivity to it, and I don't know enough about it to say true or what that is like, but I think that having that research is helpful for people. The next step is like getting that research out there so people will read it and go forth, instead of just continuing to propagate a lot of this old information, which I'm sure you saw or have seen in the mead world. There's a lot of old information that still circulates around and can sometimes make people not want to do stuff with mead because you hear about this specific thing or yada yada. So from your homebrew days, what were some myths that you remember hearing, myths or truths or whatever, that you remember hearing that you were like, I don't know if this seems right? Is there anything you can recall, or you maybe debunked through commercial brewing?
Yeah,
it's on the spot.
See a lot from people. The sulfite one's pretty big, although we haven't. It's one of those things that come and go in the media from time to time, so we haven't seen it lately. As a chemist, I can say that most people are fine with sulfites. There are some people who do have severe allergies to it, and so if you look at the history of that, it was either in the late 80s or early 90s. I forget the time frame that they started making wineries put that it contains sulfites on the bottle, and that scared everybody, and now everybody's allergic to it.
Right.
Which you're not. Typically, it's a class of compounds called anilins in red wine that give you headaches, and typically the higher alcohol in wine as well. So for the most part, people typically don't have allergies to sulfites.
Right.
We are legally restricted with how much concentration of sulfites are actually in our finished product. So I believe it's 350 parts per million right now. I forget because we never go that high. We stick to around 50 or less. So
Yeah.
we're really low end, which most meaderies and wineries are. But things like raisins, they're loaded. They can have anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 parts per million on the raisin.
Whoa.
And a lot of canned food, a lot of juices that you buy commercially, they're loaded with sulfites. So if you can eat those things and you're fine, then you're not going to get it from the wine or from our mead.
Interesting.
So look into that. So that's one of the myths we still run into from time to time. But like I said, some people, just like a peanut allergy, they are truly allergic. So we have to list it as an allergen. And then just kind of what we talked about, that people think all mead's the same, that it's going to be just this sticky, sweet, beer-like product, which is not at all. And one of the things as I started getting into mead, and what really attracted me to mead was the massive potential that mead has. Mm-hmm. So most people don't realize that all honey is different. That's a myth that we run into, because I thought that when I was little. I came from the store in this honey bear and it tasted the same. And if you take wildflower honey, which is this flowers that you don't really know what the bees are going to, they're going to whatever's blooming. That changes from spring to summer to fall, and year to year that'll change depending on how hot or cold or rainy the season is. Right. And if you go like county to county, there's a meadery up near us actually that did different counties wildflower honeys, and I got to sample the 3 different counties that were all connecting to each other, and the mead was drastically different.
Interesting. Huh.
So really cool. And then I play a lot with the monofloral honeys, which is the single pollen source honey or single nectar source honey. And there's just so many awesome honeys there. Meadow foam that tastes like cotton candy. Tupelo honey is probably one of my favorites. And so you start looking at all these different types of honey, and then you think of all the different yeast that you can add to that, and all the different fruits and spices to add, all the different ways to age it, in barrels or just in stainless, and for how long, how much alcohol there is, anywhere upwards 18% all the way down to 5%. And so we have just started scraping the surface of what mead will be in the future. And so that really got me excited when I started really diving into mead and started out, because there won't be enough time in my lifetime for people to do all the different things that they can do with mead. So that excites me.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to go back a little bit, because you talked about canning, and doing stuff with that right now. And you talked about carbonation in cans specifically. So, and I don't know what your packaging looks like, so you'll have to help me know. Are you guys doing cans mostly, or bottles, or what do you do right now?
No, so we're bottles. All our stuff is still, meaning there's no carbonation to it for people who are listening. It's corked. We primarily do 375 ml bottles. So it's like half the size of your standard wine bottle. Mm-hmm. In order to get into carbonation, it's kind of a whole new set of equipment that we need, carbonation equipment. So that's why we're not doing that yet, but hopefully in the future. Certainly on the homebrew scale, I've done a lot of carbonation and a lot of carbonated stuff on tap, and it's just absolutely incredible as well.
Yeah, it's that I feel like that is where people will. It's a great introduction for people into mead, when you can give them something that is akin to maybe a beer strength or a cider strength or something like that. That's a little more approachable. I've noticed, especially when I give non-carbonated, non-session strength meads to people, they're like, "Oh, this is 14%." Like, yes, I mean it's like wine, but that kind of scares them in a way. However, if you gave them a 14% bottle of wine, they'll still down it. So it's like there's no real difference there. It's just it's a different product, and so people are like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to get into the game. Like you're saying, though, the equipment side seems scary. I know on my end, my kegging equipment when I first started was terrifying. I can only imagine looking at a hundreds of gallons scale what kind of equipment you have to be able to carbonate and force carb and do that stuff.
Yeah, and one nice thing I will say, and I don't know if this was the kind of pandemic forcing people's hands or what, but the canning equipment has come a long way. Prior to the pandemic, there were still a lot of breweries. That was definitely the direction that beer was headed, was cans. Because I remember when I started drinking craft beer, people didn't want cans. It was seen as something gross, low-end product. And now that's what every single person wants. They want cans and not bottles now. So that started cheapening the equipment. But then during the shutdowns, it really pushed the canning system. And now we have access to canning lines that are just, top end, really nice systems for not that much money.
Right.
Probably a quarter of the price that they were when I just started 4 years ago. So that's what's really pushing us into that world now. And hopefully we can make that happen next year.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for that too. I do like myself a session strength mead. If not just because you can drink more of it in the moment, you could, anybody, I don't say anybody. It's easy to go and kill a 14% mead, bottle of mead, but then you're like, well, the next day is not always as great. And so being able to have a couple cans of mead is nice. And, it's just something to look forward to. But I look forward to you guys getting started with that too. I know that's a whole new operable operation.
Yeah, thanks.
Seems daunting.
With the spike of seltzers that came out recently too in the past couple of years, it's like, I see people drinking seltzers. I personally have never found a seltzer that I like. Yeah. Just that cane sugar base is just, I don't know, it's gross to me. So, but these carbonated meads, if you've never had them, for those listening, it's like drinking a seltzer, but with honey as the backbone. So they're amazingly refreshing and just super, super drinkable.
Yeah. And there are ways to do carbonated mead that are not in a kegging operation. I feel like I need to say this because some people are like, well, I can never make a carbonated mead because I don't have a keg. I don't have a, way to do that. You can do bottle carbonated meads as well. And that's a little bit of a different process. But that's a great way to get going. If you're interested in doing that, don't feel like you have to go spend hundreds of dollars to buy the kegging equipment. That's what I thought at first. Whenever I first started, I'd heard about them and I was like, oh, well, I guess I just have to go buy this stuff. And it's like, well, most homemade beer is not in a keg. At least some of it is, some of it's not. But well, I want to kind of wrap up with this. I want you to tell us how we can support you, how we can find you and your meads. I know you said you're working on getting them into some different stores. So if you know of anywhere, even in Pennsylvania, where people can get them, feel free to let us know.
Yeah. All right. So if you're in Pennsylvania, around the Reading, Lancaster area, we are in a lot of the Weiss, Giant, and Wegmans stores right now. So any support there really, really helps us and will help other meaderies as well. Again, dealing with corporate is not easy. They want to see things go off the shelf. So the more mead you buy from those stores, the more it helps kind of mead, across the country. If you're not from this area, we do sell everything online. So online orders. I'll warn you, the downside to online orders is that shipping is very expensive. That is completely out of our hands. Alcohol shipping is just, it's ridiculous what they charge. We do have free shipping on 12 bottles or more. Or we have flat rate on 15 bottles, 6 bottles or more as well. So if you're not willing to buy a case at this time, 6 bottles or more, we'll get some flat rate shipping. And then the final thing I say, no matter where you are, is start asking for mead everywhere you go. When you're out at dinner, one of the things that really drew me to mead again is that I love pairing it with food. And that is completely untapped right now, at least in Pennsylvania. I'm sure it's that way across most of the country. People always pair wine with food, and which is great at times, but I feel like the versatility of mead just calls to be paired with dinner. So whenever you go out to a restaurant, you go to a grocery store, you go anywhere you buy alcohol, ask for mead there, and have your friends ask for mead. The more you start bugging for it, the more they'll start getting it. And just keep asking and asking and asking, and eventually, I see good things in Mead's future. So, I appreciate all the support that you can give.
Yeah. So I'll be putting all of this information, the link to their website, to Rebel Hive Meadery website, and ways you can support them that way. But again, as Ryan's saying, like, the best way to do this is, one, to buy mead. It's, as a home brewer of mead, I love doing it, but me just making it is not necessarily helping the community grow. And half of making the community grow or helping it grow is to support the current meaderies. There's a lot of people want to start a meadery. I want to start a meadery. It sounds like a really fun thing. However, like you said from the beginning, if no one's buying the product, then what you gotta be selling some product for a meadery to be alive. So make sure you're supporting people and trying things. I personally gained the most insight, just like you said from the beginning, about mead and in my process through trying other people's mead. And a lot of that comes through the commercial process. You're going to find stuff that's amazing. Sometimes you'll find stuff that might not be as good, might not be your taste, but trying things will help you develop your palate. And I have no doubt that Ryan's 10 plus years of experience now in making mead and tasting mead have given him lots of chances to develop his palate. So, which is why he's going and winning first place and gaining awards and all these things for his mead. So, thank you for spending time today chatting, and I'm super excited to taste these. Now that we've talked about them, I wish I had them in front of me. Like, it would have been so great had I planned my life a little bit better to just, you're talking about the coffee one and I get to taste it. I'm a little bummed that I missed my pickup window for that. But I will be tasting them today. I promise you. It just, unfortunately, is not on the podcast.
Sounds good. Now we might just have to have a second podcast with some of our specialty stuff in the future.
I'm all about it. I'm all about it. Hey, well, I'll be putting all this below. Ryan, thank you so much for your time, and I promise you, everyone here is going to go. They should at least go and buy a bottle and support you guys, because you guys are super awesome, and you've so graciously not only spent your time, but shipped me some mead, so that's very kind of you. So we'll catch you again in the future, and like I said, maybe we'll pick up another podcast. Maybe I'll try and do some stuff that you do, make some mead in the style you do, and see if I can. I want to try to make one of your recipes. I want to see if I can figure it out. That'd be kind of fun.
That'll be cool.
So,
all right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.